Yes, and I will just share my screen.
Super. And while you're doing so, I'll start. So good afternoon, everyone. Really good to see you and really lovely to see some familiar faces as well. My name is Roy Magara. I'm an employment solicitor at Magara Law, and I'm joined today by Helen Joy. Helen, would you like to introduce yourself?
I would indeed. So my name is Helen Joy, and my business is People Spark, and I work with managers and leaders of businesses from sort of 5 people through to 5,000 people as well. And just to let you know, if on Zoom, I don't know if you all know, when we're sharing a screen on Zoom, if you hover your mouse, and depending on how you've got your screen set up, you can move this. If you hover your mouse in between the screen share and where the people are, and you can then drag it across, so you can make the slides smaller and the people bigger, depending on which bit you want to see more of.
Quite right. Super, thank you. Of course, keep your cameras on. It's lovely to see you. If you want to take them off, completely up to you. Feel free to use a chat box. If you want to speak, raise your hand, but just unmute yourself anyway. I want to make this as interactive as possible. It is not a lecture, but it's very much hopefully going to be a really great discussion. So good to see you all. And in the spirit of it being interactive, let's kick off and let's start with a poll. So Helen, if you do the honors, and in the meantime,
right. Now, I just realized I don't know if I could do that when I'm sharing my screen.
All right, well, while you're
no, I can.
that out,
sorry, honestly, I'm so used to, I've got back to face-to-face training, so clearly I've forgotten everything I've learned in the past 2 years about how to do things online. Right, can you see that poll? No, not yet. So if I launch that poll now, I'll just let Louise in.
Super, thank you. So everyone, here's the question at the start. So according to various reports, work is one of the most common causes of stress for adults. In a 2017 survey, take a guess, how many fit notes were related to workplace stress and anxiety? So you've got 327,000, 638,000, 573,000, or 429,000.
8 out of 9, or 8 out of 8, yeah. So I think that's unfortunate. Louise, you came in a little bit late for that one, but we'll end that poll now. See what do you want to know what the results were first? Oh. Okay, do you want me to share those results, Roy?
Yeah, sure, go for it. And I'll continue. So it looks like most people, while Helen, you're going to share that, had voted for 638,000, which is quite high. It probably is right now, but in 2017, the right answer was 573,000. So that's quite high, but for what it's worth, that was 70,000 more than the previous year. So those who have chosen 638 are probably right for 2018 or 2019, which is good, but equally it's a bad thing because evidently stress is becoming much more common part of our lives. So stress, as we all know in some way, shape or form, given where we're at, it's how the body and the brain respond to demands in life. That can be family, work, school, life changes, traumatic events. We know that there's good kinds of stress, but we're not here to talk about that. We're talking about the bad kind of stress. And unfortunately, the reality is that if they're coming up to nearly 750,000 worth of fit notes to do with workplace stress, it's quite likely that all of us in some way, shape or form have had some kind of experience with that ourselves. The health and safety executive typically describes stress as that adverse reaction people have to excessive pressures or other types of demands placed on them. And the whole point of this particular discussion we're going to be having today is how we can prevent that as best as possible, and to hopefully educate one another and, in some cases, have the courage to speak to our managers, our bosses, our employees, and make sure this topic isn't a taboo subject, and hopefully to create some positive change. Quick other poll before I pass on to you, Helen, to look at some of the signs of stress. So next poll, please. Helen, if you can bring that up.
There we go.
Thank you. How many British adults stated that they commonly experience work-related stress? And this is according to a study by Perkbox. Okay, so by the looks of things, most of you went for 79%, and those of you who did so are correct. Isn't that incredible? 79%. I certainly know that I'm in that quota of people who've been on the wrong end, as it were, not that there's a right end, but the wrong end of workplace stress. And the reality is it's not great. It doesn't just affect you at work, it affects you at home, it affects who you are as an individual, and in some cases it can have really long-term effects. So 79%, that's probably those who are ready and willing to admit that they've gone through that. And interestingly enough, researchers also found that work is one of the biggest causes of stress. So that's above relationships, that's above financial stress, etc. So it's actually much worthwhile talking about. Helen, what does stress look like and feel like for us and or our teams?
Right. Well, this is where we said it was going to be an interactive exercise as well, because I can't possibly tell you what stress looks like for your teams, can I? Because I don't know your team. So apologies, I am using something. Anybody seen this? I'm sharing my screen here, and this is called Mural. Has anybody seen Mural before or used it? It is. It's a wonderful, wonderful little piece of kit. And what it allows you to do is we can have slides on it. But what we'll do is I'm going to pop you into breakout rooms just for a couple of minutes to talk about what does stress look like in your team. So some of you may not be able to put your microphones or your cameras on, but you can use your chat boxes. I'm going to pop you into sort of 2 or 3 rooms. And then if you can then sort of between you discuss what it looks like for your teams, because I could tell you what it looks like for me, I could tell you what it looks like for teams I've worked in, but actually stresses for everybody, stresses for everyone are different, and they're different whether you're hybrid, whether you're working in the same office. So is everyone happy to get involved and get into a breakout room? And they're fabulous. So what I will do now, as I say, if you can't share, if you can't speak, then please do feel free to use the chat. So I'm going to pop you into 3 rooms. And I'm just going to give you, Roy, it will probably take you as well, so I'll probably move you around in a second. I will open those rooms, and what I'll do is give you a few minutes to discuss what stress looks like for you and within your teams.
Super.
Super.
Hi, Helen. Sorry about that.
Chris, that's all right. We're just popping people in breakout rooms for the moment, just to have a chat in just in their groups about sort of what stress looks like for them, because obviously, as I said, I can talk about what stress looks like for me, but actually it's different for everybody, and I think that's kind of trying to get that message across. If I'm going to pop you into room 3, if that's all right, is that okay?
All right.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Bye.
Hi, Roy.
Nice to see you, Grace. All right, great. Should we pause the recording for now and then restart it when people come in?
Good plan.
Oh, I bounced back.
Oh,
Sorry.
it's all right.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining in your breakout rooms. We're going to go through your teams and see what some of you came up with. So, James, you were in one of the teams. Please talk us through some of the things that you guys discussed.
Yeah, so in our team, we had it from both perspectives. So, Annie, do you want to mute?
Yeah, sorry. Where am I? Oh, yeah, off you go, yeah.
Yeah, so we had it from both perspectives. So for me, I work from home mostly. So I take my stresses home with me. They're always with me. They're only a room away. And I don't have that same luxury of being able to bounce ideas off people. Or if I'm feeling really anxious about something, it's always via a video camera. You don't have that personal interaction or touch that you get when you're in the office. So that can be very stressful. And the anxiety of your work always being with you. So for me, it's not normally the actual stress of any particular situation that makes me really stressful. It's actually the fact that the work is always at home with you. So it's that escapism isn't there as it is when you leave the office. You have a commute home, and then you get home and you have two different elements to your life. And Andrea was saying almost the opposite to that is she sort of brings that work, the stress to work with her, and can often feel like she carries that with her if she's feeling angry or frustrated or whatever in a particular situation. Then she can bring that to work with her, as opposed to it being at home, is what I interpreted from that.
Thank you very much. Anything else that anyone from your team wants to expand on from there before we move on to another team?
No.
Great, thank you. All right, next one I think was Donna's team. Donna, anything to share from your team, please?
I just think that we all recognize that when there's stress around us, that we're less productive, less team-oriented, less ability to, innovate. It's when you have other team members that are supposed to be actual team members and prove themselves otherwise, that creates even additional stress, because then you can't really be a team.
Right, I hear you. Thank you very much for that. Anything else from anyone in your team that wants to expand on anything before we move on to the next one? No? Super. Paul, Tim. Paul, I'll come to you first in terms of anything that was discussed on your side, and then come to you, Tim.
We're talking about Tim was saying work-life balance, and it's difficult to be able to juggle these sorts of things, and to it can make people hyper-focused sometimes. So yeah, difficulties from what I got from Tim. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing all those. And I think in terms of kind of what it can look like. So there's some images around there, and you've got the sort of the images of people feeling like they're bombarded with work. You've got the very stressed looking people, or the kind of anxious, lonely looking people there. But also sometimes stress can still look like people are fine. We don't always show when we're anxious. I don't have a poker face. You know exactly when I'm not feeling great, no matter how hard I try. But some people have an amazing ability to completely compartmentalize and completely bring just their professional self to work. And I do think that the last 2 years have really sort of seen a real positive blur of those boundaries a little bit. I think it's feeling a lot more acceptable to bring your full self into and out of places. But some people, we tend to go the opposite of our usual selves when we're very, very under pressure. So people that are normally quiet and reserved might well explode, or the people that are generally quite dramatic and you know their presence, you're very conscious that they're part of that team, might suddenly go back in and become very, very reserved. And I think we've picked up quite a few of those there. People, work-life balance, bringing things, things that maybe would have been compartmentalized before sort of bleed over into different parts. And I think, again, you know your team and you know what their normal behavior is. And I think it's that being conscious and aware of when somebody isn't being themselves, and just making a note of that, and just kind of thinking, okay, is it just a passing? Are they a bit stressed about a work deadline, or is there something happening at home that you're conscious of? But just keep it, once you recognize that, make a note of it, and then just go back in and check on that and make sure that they're not consistently showing that extreme opposite end of their behavior as well. And I think the key is that whole part of stress is something that shows up differently for everybody. Make sure you're aware of, if you know your team quite well. And again, when you're working remotely, it's really easy to show up and be yourself for 20 minutes, a half an hour. I don't know if any of you, I've certainly done it over the past 2 years, where I've put the face on for the meeting and the camera's gone off and suddenly it's been, so it's that recognition of kind of starting to understand when your team's different and knowing who needs a catch up, who needs a little kind of touch point to say, you weren't quite yourself, and recognizing that stress looks and feels different for every single one of us. And I think sometimes we forget that, especially if we're working remotely, because we do get consigned within our own little bubbles, and we think about things in terms of our perceptions and our focus of things. So that's my kind of my key point around that particular area. So I'm going to hand over to Roy for the causes of stress. Anybody got anything else to add, or any questions around that?
Everyone is sat looking rather content. We will take that as you are indeed content. Indeed. Next one. Causes of stress in the workplace. Rather interestingly, although maybe it's an occupational hazard being an employment lawyer, but apparently studies show that about a quarter, so about 24% of line managers believe employee well-being is not their responsibility. And quite frankly, some of us are probably sat there thinking, actually, some managers take it upon themselves to cause the stress rather than do anything to do with employee well-being. In my practice, and I think as studies have shown, there are 6 main areas that can lead to work-related stress. And again, some of us may or may not have had some kind of personal experience with this. I'd be interested to know, perhaps maybe by show of hands, or you can put in the group, whether, as far as you're concerned, this has been an area of work-related stress for you. So the first one is demand. Whether you at any point have had too much on your plate to juggle. Yeah, quite a few of us. Next one is control. So you've been unable to control the way you do your work. You're told to do something, but you're not given any autonomy to do it because you're being micromanaged or what have you. And then there's the flip side of that, which is support. You're told to do something, but you're not given enough information and or support to do it. We've all been, well, a number of us have been in that category indeed. The next one is relationships. So you're having trouble with relationships at work, whether it's a line manager, a colleague, you're being bullied, you're being spoken to a certain way. A manager is absolutely fine with one person in the meeting, but then by the time they get to you, tone, pitch, body language, everything changes. The next one is your role. So if you've been given a post, but you don't actually understand what your responsibilities are, what your role actually is. And the last one is to do with change. So there's been a work change. We've all probably been through some kind of work change in the last couple of years, but the business isn't engaged with you when you're undergoing that particular change, and you find yourself just sort of lost at sea in many respects. I think from the sounds of things, with some of us, and I'll probably include myself, will probably easily put our hands up to absolutely every single one. And most of the clients that I have will easily fit into one of those boxes. So while I'm not trying to do myself out of a job, I'd rather be out of a job and know that that people aren't going through work-related stress if people just get this kind of stuff right. And I think, as Helen, you pointed out, stress affects each of us differently. And we can all handle different amounts of stress. But it should very much be, to use a legal term, a subjective test. It shouldn't be, well, I'm not affected by that, so why are you reacting that way? I can handle this, so why can't you handle that? We've all got things going on behind the screen, behind our doors, behind our professional selves at home. And it's really important for these sorts of conversations to be transparent. When I was doing some research for this topic, I found that 55% of us experience anxiety as a result of work-related stress, and almost half of us lose sleep. And a lot of other people result to comfort eating, and loads of other people become irritable, lose themselves, etc. So it's really important those of us who are managers or those of us who are in HR and what have you, like talk to your workers, talk to your employees, identify what those signs of stress are and see how you can prevent them and reduce stress in your workplace. Because the unfortunate reality is about 45% of people in one of the polls I looked at show that their workplace doesn't have anything in place to help with stress. Yet you've got some nice little poster in the kitchen somewhere going on about the health and safety executive next to the kettle, which people can look at, but actually there are no real conversations going on. And that's the whole point of us talking today. That's the whole point of us hopefully having these discussions with people. So I think I was actually going to do a poll, but I've actually given you the answer already. So I'm not going to bother doing a poll.
Well, you can see who's listening, Roy.
Oh, yes. I won't put anyone on the spot. We'll leave the poll aside. But what I will do is we'll go on and talk about the importance of workplace appraisals. And Helen, I'll pass on to you first to kind of lay the foundation, as it were, of this particular principle, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So in terms of appraisals, I'm a massive believer that appraisals are a fantastic tool within the workplace, and they are a great way for somebody to have a way of measuring and understanding how they're performing, what the plans are for them moving forward within an organization, and sort of their career plans and how that actually works. I'm not a great fan of those being held once a year in isolation. And I think this is where it's absolutely key that that appraisal is just one part of an ongoing communication that happens between an employer and people within their business, within their teams. And they're a great kind of foundation, but actually, if they're not followed up with more regular reviews in between, then they can actually become one of the biggest causes of stress for people. Because if you're waiting if you know that something's not gone right or something hasn't worked in the way that it was supposed to, if you think you've got to wait another 11 months until that's actually raised and discussed, that's 11 months of anxiety and stress and worry that don't need to be there. So for me, they are absolutely critical as a part of an ongoing management performance and development plan, but they need to be something that is consistently followed up in terms of a regular formal review, but also then, regular weekly catch-ups or just a check-in and how are you doing, how are you getting on, but having something to relate that back to.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you, Helen. And talking about it as well in a more practical sense, if the stresses appear to be work-related, well, if you're in HR or you hold some kind of managerial or team leader position, then perhaps you can consider some of the following questions. Can those stressors actually be removed or reduced? So we talked about demand or change of role, for example, etc. And be realistic about answering that question. If not, what support can be given to that individual to help them cope? Another practical question to ask is, what resources are needed or available to help? Instead of thinking about profit margins, how about hiring an extra member of staff or what have you to help? Or get some training on board? Are there HR policies in place? Like James talked about the great benefits of flexible working, but actually the flip side of that is that if you don't see your team, or if you don't have a lot of communication with your team, then one can feel a little bit estranged, as it were. So it's important for businesses to find the best balance of both. And equally, yes, it's all fine and well employers making all these changes, but what then could be the impact on others when you make those sorts of work adjustments for that one individual? So it's not exactly straightforward in that sense. And Helen, you talked about the fact that appraisals ought not to be the sort of once a year event. And you're totally right, because the amount of times I get clients come on board and say, I thought I was doing absolutely fine for the whole year. And then my appraisal came along and my manager told me I wasn't doing anything right. And then, of course, it just goes downhill. There's lack of trust involved, there's demotivation, the list goes on. At least if there's that kind of open and transparent conversation going as the year progresses, there won't be any nasty surprises. So the onus, I suppose, it's a lot on managers. And yes, managers are human beings too, but equally, if you're a manager, you've taken on board that extra responsibility. And it's as simple as that. So, that being said, has anyone got any thoughts on what we've discussed so far?
Roy, I reflect back a few years when I had quite a large team with me, and I used to work at weekends, which isn't particularly good, I realise, in work-life balance. But it wasn't, you know, I'd feel quite good on a Sunday having got a few emails and sent it off to the team. And I now realise much more than I ever did do, that wasn't a good thing to send stuff out on Sundays, so they come straight in on Mondays. So it, you know, I wouldn't say I was being selfish, but it was not the right thing to do as I look back, although I felt better having got on with things. So I think there's the wider perspective at all the actions we take.
I hear you. You're right. What I sometimes do, even from my point of view, is I might draft the emails, but I'll set it not to go out until a certain point in the future, so I can get that work done, but at least give myself that leeway.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's also point. You kind of find as well, it's because people work, there's a lot more flexible working now, and I've seen quite a lot of emails coming out that say that my working days are, you know, at the bottom, my working days are Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. If I don't respond to your email, that may be the reason, or, you know, I won't come back to you until Wednesday, so if it's urgent, contact this person. And also there's a couple of companies as well that have a footer that says something similar, but the opposite, which is that I sometimes work erratic hours. If this communication lands at a time when you're not working, please do not respond until you're back in work, which I think is a great sentiment. I think if people are in a state of mind where they're stressed, they may still react and respond to that, may still add extra stress onto that. But I also acknowledge that you can't possibly remember, if you work in a big organization, you can't remember possibly the working patterns of 93 different people. You know, that's not realistic, is it? So at least there is that part of you know, that the effort is being made to say, look, I might work late because that's my work pattern, but I don't expect you to respond. And I think it comes down to the culture, and if the culture backs up what's being said there.
I agree. I think you set yourself realistic. It also falls on an employee to set themselves realistic boundaries. And I know when I first started in the area that I now work in, I was working really excessively and till early in the morning, later in the night, and then on weekends. And it was actually Annie and the rest of the team that acknowledged it and said, actually, what you're doing is you're setting a precedent for yourself and other senior members, where if they are now sending you work to do after 5:30, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening and expecting that work to be done, it's because you've set a precedent over the course of sort of 3 or 4 months of constantly doing it. And if that's the working pattern for whatever reason, dropping children off, and then they work later in the evening because that's their working pattern, I'm then expected to do that work because I've set a precedent for it. So I think giving yourself boundaries and yeah, just as Roy says, I've now adopted using technology to help with that. So if I am doing work later because I've had to go to take the dog to the vets or go to whatever it is, I will set those emails to go out at 10 o'clock the following morning. So it's not, the visibility of me online isn't the same anymore as it was previously, where you're always active and always there to respond. And I think that's really important.
I think that's absolutely right, James. I'm also reflecting on a client I've currently got, which is based in London. There's branches in Australia and the States as well. So day is night and night is day to a certain extent. And we do have to sort of control ourselves a bit and not expect an instant response when it comes in, let's say, from Australia. So I guess the culture and the etiquette needs to be developed, doesn't it, to head that sort of thing off.
Very much around that culture and the behaviour that is considered to be appropriate, isn't it, in that organisation, and the leadership of the people who have to set that culture.
Right.
So.
If I may, Gracious, I know, sorry to sound like I'm picking on you, but you're very much in the sort of mental health sphere as well, and I appreciate we've done a couple of webinars before on the subject. Have you got anything to add, or maybe some thoughts to share on this topic from a workplace point of view?
Nothing that hasn't already been said. I think just echoing what everyone else is saying about kind of adapting to for example, hybrid working and seeing that as a positive. For example, some people do find that they prefer working later in the evenings because that's more suitable to their kind of schedule, whether it's dropping children off at school or they're just more productive in the evenings. But then also having something there so that they can manage expectations, like Helen said, so that other people who are kind of receiving emails or communicating with them know that they choose to work at that time and that's more convenient for them. But that doesn't mean they're always available 24, throughout the working day as well. So I think just being able to use communication, whether it's via emails or setting something on your email to just communicate that, I think that's really helpful. So I think, yeah, that's kind of what I would have to add as well. And just said.
Thank you. And Anne, I knew I said I wasn't going to pick on you, but I have thought you've had the benefit of being in an organization for a long time, and you've had one of those key insights of seeing an organization change over a number of years. What, as far as you are concerned, do you think that your organization has learnt from on this particular subject, and what do you think organizations could do better from your point of view?
Yeah, well, what can I say? Yeah, we have changed a lot over the last 2 years, like you say, Roy. I mean, people have come and gone, and it's really stressful, especially in our team, as James will tell you. We've had people come and go over the last 2 years, and I've been here for over 7.5 years now, and it is stressful because it's just left to you to deal with and everything, you know what I mean? And you just feel responsible for everything that's happening all the time. And James will tell you, I do get really stressed about it, don't I, James? And because I feel responsible because we're not looking after the clients as well as we should be, because we haven't got the people in place. So I think we're trying to learn from it, Roy. I mean, like, I work in the office and I prefer to work in the office than from home because you have more interaction with people and everything. So, and like James says, it's lovely to see James when he comes into the office because we do bounce off each other, or he Zoom calls me and says we'll have a conversation because he feels stressed, or I Zoom call him because I say I feel stressed. So, we have each other to bounce off. So, yeah.
Yeah, really important thoughts. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I think, as you say, all of us have been in some kind of organizational change, whatever that might look like, in the past couple of years. So thank you for that. One of the realities in that, indeed, people leave, whether it's redundancies or life happens, whatever the case may be, and that has a real effect on those who are left. It's true. It's true.
I just want to touch on the kind of communication side of things for a minute. And I think it's that what's great there, and is clearly in your organization, you've got that real understanding of how valuable that communication is and how important it is for both of you and your team to have that opportunity and that person, that those people that you can have those conversations with. And I think when you're managing a team of people, again, it's so important to make sure they know that they can speak to you, whether that is a case of putting in regular weekly catch-ups with everybody in the team. I know that takes up a lot of time, but actually it kind of saves time in the long run, doesn't it? Because if people know they've got time that they can definitely speak to you, they're not building things up for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I think whether it's daily catch-ups, weekly catch-ups, I know some teams at the moment that are having like a 9:30 catch-up in the morning, even just for 15 minutes, just to sort of check in, a little morning check-in, make sure everybody's okay, make sure everyone kind of just rattles through their top 3 priorities for that day, and then a 4:30, 5 o'clock catch-up that just says, how are we all feeling, how do we get on? It's not a why didn't you do that session, it's just in the same way that what had happened if you were all together in the same room.
Yeah,
it's just to recreate that sense of what did you achieve, what did you not achieve, what needs to go to tomorrow, is there anything I can help you with? And that's the kind of main sort of emphasis behind it, is what help do you need, how can I help you tomorrow? And that for them is working absolutely brilliantly.
Yeah, because when James comes into the office, we often sit for about 15 minutes by the window here and just have a conversation between us both and talk about things. and have a laugh.
Yeah, and do you know what, that is so valuable, and I think that's again what we've lost a little bit, certainly in the past kind of 6 months, is, you know, the conversations I've been having with people were that because we've shifted to a lot of home working, I know people who go into the office and spend all day on Zoom calls, and it's kind of defeats the whole object, doesn't it? It's like, what on earth is that all about? And we tend to, because Zoom calls are scheduled, we go straight into business and then straight out, and we're really, in a lot of places, are losing that human connection. They're losing that relationship with the people in their teams because it's business, and it's so important. Andrea, got your hand up.
I just wanted to add, because like, it reminded me of so many different things as you were talking, and what we're discussing is one of the things, I've worked in different industries and lots of different teams, and one of the recurring themes I always found is when it comes to, you know, management and leadership, is no matter where you are at what level, I found that the individuals and those leading teams as well, it seemed to always, like, they always seem to have the same challenges, you know, like everybody else. So you can see it across, and probably one of them would be, whether it's, you call it stress management, or having those conversations, you know, having challenging and difficult conversations, because for some people these are, whether it's emotional intelligence, or, you know, you can package it into lots of different things, but do people, it always makes me question, as do we, within our teams and whoever's responsible, do people actually have the capability, do they have the skills, the knowledge and the skills to have those conversations? Because if you don't have, you can probably end up doing more damage than being helpful, and, you know, could be hindering. And sometimes it's just people bringing their, you know, authentic self, and just, you know, what would you do if this was your family or your friend or your children, or, you know, this kind of just looking at, sometimes it can be difficult to balance. And reminded me when we looked at, you know, the action-centered leadership model, John Adler is focusing on the balance, you know, the juggling the team, the task, and the individual. Is almost like you can look at all of this and have to have the balance of all. So it just made me think of all of that. And I find, like, lots of times it's the middle level of management that is the most challenging and most difficult because they have even in stress, because I just look at it like in between, you know, so almost like stuck, because they have the pressure from above, and they also have the pressure and the demands from below, from the teams as well. And I think that's where potentially we can make the biggest difference, is you know, those middle management level.
Yeah, it's funny actually, Andrew, that's the section I focus on in my business, because I'm absolutely passionate about that middle, because they're squashed from both directions, and so they're getting pressure from above and pressure from underneath. And for me, it's about arming them with all the skills and the ability to have those conversations. And right at the beginning, for me, you're absolutely right. If you don't feel you've got the skills and the tools to have some of those difficult conversations, for me, it's about saying, just go in there with genuine curiosity, go in there with genuine desire to find out what's happening with that person, how you can help, or how they can help themselves. You know, it's don't go in with here's my agenda and here's the things I'm going to get cross about. Go in to find out what's causing that, because more often than not, it's never what you think it is.
Quite right. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughts. Let's keep going, if we may, and just have a look at identifying stressors and then what we can do next, simply. Helen, if you could kindly take us on to the next section of the mural. That'd be great.
It's not behaving in with it.
That's all right, no worries. While it's getting us to wherever we're supposed to be, people raise some really interesting points, but when we look at defining workplace stress, I think we've all touched on them really, so I'm not going to spend much time with this point or repeat myself. But what I will say is that practically speaking, Anne, James, Tim, you all mentioned this point in different ways and shapes and forms, but when it comes to those meetings, I remember being in meetings where you'd have a kind of catch up and see how everyone's doing. It's kind of, okay, Roy, how are you? And what have you got on today? And it just became very transactional. Hi, yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, all is well, nothing much. Anyway, this is what I'm doing. Because either it didn't feel like there was the opportunity to kind of delve in as deep as possible, or the relationships weren't right in order to talk about what really mattered. So one thing that teams may benefit from is indeed either you kind of note or you highlight, okay, so-and-so gets on with so-and-so, perhaps maybe just schedule more broken up meetings so people have chances to vent or to build up each other in your teams. But also there's a flip side, as I think a few of you have mentioned already, in that those meetings should be, I say safe places, but places where people can actually say, actually, you know, I'm really struggling with my workload or this or that. I know I was supposed to hit that target yesterday, but I didn't, and it's because of X, Y, and Z. And that person should be able to freely say that without feeling, oh goodness, I'm going to be reprimanded for this. I mean, particularly when we're all adults here, no one needs to feel like they're back in school and they didn't do their homework yesterday and they're fearing what the headmaster is going to do. We shouldn't be in that headspace anymore. It should be, oh, okay, noted. Well, you know what, we're a team. How can we help? How can we foster? How can we grow? Do you need less? Do you need different challenges, etc.? It's about making those conversations more positive and more transparent for people. And as you can see on the screen, I won't highlight anything because you can all read, but you can see different sort of hints and tips where we can move from causes of workplace stress to things that employers or managers or HR or we all can do to flip that on its head. The sad reality is that a lot of the communications I have with clients, particularly in those initial ones, is, okay, yeah, you talk about the stress, the anxiety. And then the next question I often ask is, are you on any medication? And so many of them are. And the more I ask, the more I think, gosh, I need to make sure I don't get too sort of hard and your medication, okay, yeah, noted. Because no one needs to be on medication in that sense. They're on medication because of the anxieties, the stresses, the whatever it is that's happening at work. These things are preventable. Things can be done about this. So let's please continue to try and let's treat people as people, and let's take on board, let's encourage one another to take on board the things we're talking about today. I've got nothing else to say on this slide unless anyone does. If not, we'll move on to the last section of the topic. Yeah,
and the workplace stresses that we talked about, that Roy ran through before. I think the key is kind of how can you identify where your team is currently, and the simplest response to that is ask them. And I think it's kind of, you know, whether you do things like SurveyMonkey, you can do anonymous quizzes that way. There are various different online options that you can use now, because actually people don't necessarily, it depends on the environment you've got and the sense of trust that you've got in your business. Because I've talked to clients who, when I've said to them, you know, ask their team what their stresses are, and so they won't tell me. And well, there's two answers to that. One is, well, maybe we need to work on the culture before we ask the question, then maybe we need to build that trust first. Or secondly, well, how do you know they won't tell you? Because actually they might surprise you, especially if you give them an opportunity to do that on an anonymous basis. And doing sort of regular surveys and regular check-ins can be a real positive. And especially even if within the first questionnaire that they don't respond particularly in a particularly high volume, if they see you taking action on the feedback that you have had, you will get more response next time, because it's about that building trust. It's creating that trusting environment where they know that nobody is criticized, or you know, there's no negative consequences of being open and honest, is the only way that you can build that trust. So making sure that you take that feedback and you act on that. And if you can't act on that feedback, at least feedback why you can't. There may be, because, you know, sometimes people will suddenly turn around and go, right, I want everyone to bring their dogs to work on a Thursday. Well, actually that's not practically realistic, but we can understand why it might be a benefit, and we can understand how that would work, and maybe one person will bring their dog in once a month or so, you know, but it's that engagement, it's that two-way consequence. But what I think is a real powerful thing to do is, if you think about those top workplace stressors, and if you think about asking your team how they feel about each of those 6 different elements, and actually take time to talk through and to listen to their responses to that, that's actually a hugely powerful thing that you can do. You can also sit and objectively look at, looking at this from your own point of view, and there were lots of hands raised early on when we were talking about these different factors. So thinking about, how stressful do I find these personally, so, on a scale of 1 to 10. And again, asking your team to, how do these different areas impact you? Because what you can do then is actually identify, is there one common theme? Is there one thing that is affecting more people? Because that can be the one thing that you can focus on first, because it will have more of an impact on more people. Quite often it's that dysfunctional relationships. I've worked in environments where, it takes one person with a very bad attitude, it takes one bully, it takes one negative person, and the negative impact that person can have across a whole team, across a whole organization. If you take that person out of the equation, whether that's by dealing with the behavior, or it's got beyond that and you need to talk to someone like Roy to help you remove them from your organization, that's the impact that then that has on everybody else. And then the uplift that comes from dealing with that person, just genuinely, the return on investment in terms of time and effort in dealing with that situation can be incomparable in a lot of organizations. But I think these 6 areas, I think, are really key for you to sort of take a real objective look at from your own point of view, but also for your team, and then asking them for feedback around those areas. How would you feel about asking your team about those areas if you've got a team?
Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, like the lack of support, I do ask and say, sorry, but there's not enough support here to help with the workload. And that, because then that makes you stress, because you haven't got the support in place to deal with the workload. Yeah.
And it's understanding the impacts that has, isn't it? And and I know in lots of organizations, that sometimes that feedback upwards is, I was with some people, some people last week where we were having this conversation. They're saying, we've asked this question time and time again, and we've fed back time and time again. And sometimes it's around having to change how you feed that back, because one chap was saying, I must have said this 15 times, and it's like, in the nicest possible way, how can you say it differently? Because that's not being heard. We did talk about the fact that maybe they have to do interpretive dance in order to get the attention of the team around them, as a method of feeding back. But it's that way of just looking at making sure that the impacts of these things are understood on the individuals, as well as in a kind of corporate sense. Because I think sometimes as a business, the further away from the front line, the easier it is to dismiss these as key
I think
factors.
for Annie and I, it's quite unique because we are part of one of only 5 employee-owned law firms in the country. So as employee owners, there's a certain level of you reach above sort of the traditional employee structure, and then having a line manager and have a management structure in that way, the hierarchy is relatively flat. So when we have weekly meetings at the same time, the same place, the same attendees every week. And initially when I first joined, I thought it was really overkill to have that, because where I'd come from previously, that there was very, very little interaction from a hierarchy level. It was so leveled up. Whereas the meetings we have every week for an hour and a half really are an opportunity to list your highest with the issues. It's an issues list that we work off very interactively, as we're doing now. And the team votes upon the top 3 issues. You work through those, and then when they're dealt with satisfactorily, you vote on the next top 3. And as employee owners, you sort of have it's easier for us to have a say. But I remember working previously where there is a very, very defined hierarchy structure. You just feel like actually what you want to achieve has to go through maybe 5 or 6 levels of management before any change can be made. Whereas for Annie and I, change is relatively quick. If any member of our team needs something changed, it can be changed that day, actually. Realistically, some things can take longer, but if it's just from a support or anything like that, we can say, and then it can be normally resolved very quickly. So I think that's something other firms should really look at and adopt, is the hierarchy structure, and how long and how effective is it for your employees to raise something. No one cares if the change is going to be in 3 months' time. There'll be more issues by then. You know, when someone needs help, they need help then and there, which we're very fortunate to get. But I know it's not the same for most firms.
And that's amazing, because that picks up on 2 of those workplace stresses, doesn't it, James? Straight away, you've got the lack of control, because if things are being put in place to enable you to get more control over that, and that lack of support, so they know that that support is there, is again, you know, it's really powerful to know that as a business you've gone, right, we can take these 2 kind of out of the equation, as it were, because we know we can control, or we can help support them through those.
Helen, you mentioned a little earlier, and it struck a chord with me actually, the adverse effects of negativity in a team. And if you do have a sort of Eeyore type individual who it doesn't have to drag everybody else down at the same time, and that it is right and correct to deal with it. Also, smile occasionally in the meetings. I always remember looking around a room, and if 1 or 2 people are smiling, it really helps. So it's sort of setting the mood sometimes, isn't it? And preparing for meetings, and also somebody sort of going on and on and on and not getting to the point, managing that situation as well, because it doesn't half eat up time. If you're going round and round the houses, they may not be prepared, or they're waffling or something, but it does need controlling.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, you know, it's one of my favourite quotes is that 58% of new managers don't get any training in the first 18 months of their roles. Which means that they don't have those skills, and that's why quite often a lot of these situations are unable to take root, because people are promoted and don't always know how to manage difficult situations and don't know how to address those problems. And you know, it's quite simple, that a couple of tips and tools and techniques that can help manage that and prevent the stress for them and for everybody within their team as well, which is so
just to add to what Tim said, and I'm conscious of your timings, but I'll just quickly add from our meetings again, 2 things that are really great factors within our meetings are everybody at the start of the meeting. We go around and you just have an opportunity, a couple of seconds, to say, within the last week, since the last meeting, what's one really positive thing that's happened from a personal perspective, and one thing that's happened from a work perspective that's gone really well. And then at the end of the meeting, so we go through the process of the meeting, and at the end of the meeting, again, it's all interactively, everyone votes on how that meeting went, and if your vote is less than a 7 or an 8, then you have just a couple of seconds to say, well, actually, it really annoyed me that 2 of you weren't on time for the meeting, that held everyone back, or it really annoyed me that we lost traction because we were just veering off on irrelevant subjects. Or, you know, there's really, to rate a meeting, I think, is really important. It gives everyone else and the person who's leading that meeting some feedback as well. I think too often you forget, when you're in a meeting and in attendance, the person that's running that meeting also needs to come off and feel there's some feedback for them. And I know when I've run those meetings, it's really nice when people say, yeah, I give that meeting a 9 or a 10. It was very, very swift. Or I give it a 4, actually, because everyone was late. Nobody gave much interaction and we didn't achieve very much. So I think that's just a takeaway for other people who are running meetings. They're 2 really top tips of what to do. And I know me and Annie and the rest of our team, you know, enjoy those two elements of the meeting.
I love those, James. Thank you for sharing that. That is absolutely fantastic, because again, it kind of puts a little bit of pressure on the person running the meeting to make sure that they're keeping it to time, that they're keeping control of it, that they're making sure it's productive, which I don't know about you, but not all the meetings I've ever been to have been those things. So I may be borrowing that. Thank you, James and Annie.
It's
Fine.
fine.
And we do have a buzzer as well on the system that if it goes on too long, you can press it and say over.
Tangent alert.
A tangent alert, that's called, yeah. Yeah, we do. So
Brilliant.
I've often pressed it and said, no, we've talked about it too long, and we move on.
As you can tell, I talk a lot, so it's not normally aimed at me.
I think I might
Well,
be at the receiving end of that buzzer quite often as well, James.
And speaking of time, we've actually run out of time, which is a good sign in the sense that hopefully we've all taken away something from this. Really grateful to all of you for your attendance, for your thoughts. I've learned a lot from all of you as well, so I'm really grateful for that. Helen, any last words to add before we close?
No, I think thank you all. Thank you for your engagement and bearing with me with the groups and the use of Mural. We will send a PDF of this mural around as well.
Thank you.
For you. So it's got those slides and a couple of those kind of key things on there as well. So yeah, thank you. Lovely to meet you all as well.
No, it was lovely.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Very informative. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Roy. Thanks, Helen.
Bye-bye. Enjoy the
You're
rest
very
of
welcome.
the day.
Bye,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
First class.
everyone.
Thank you very much.